There's a recurring nightmare scenario for almost every serious UPSC aspirant.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
Picture this. You're in the mains exam hall. The air conditioning is humming, the clock is ticking, and the pressure is just palpable.
Yep.
You turn over General Studies, paper 1, and there it is. Question 14. It asks you to critically analyze the distribution of settlements, or maybe the basis of urban amenities in rural areas.
And that's the moment where your heart just sinks, right? You start racking your brain, trying to remember some complex sociological theory you skimmed in a thick academic journal 3 months ago. You're panicking.
Exactly. You're digging for something complicated, looking for a quote from some famous herbal planner.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the irony, and it is a painful irony if you realize it too late. The answer, the actual structural foundation for that high-stakes answer, was sitting in your backpack when you were 12 years old.
It's the classic hidden in plain sight phenomenon. It really is. We overlook the basics because we assume basic means insufficient, but today I think we're going to prove that wrong.
We absolutely are. Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Today, we're doing something that sounds simple on the surface, but is actually quite radical in its approach. We are taking the NCERT Class 7 Geography, Chapter 7.
But that's the one. Human environment, settlement, transport, and communication.
Exactly. And we aren't just reading it, we are deconstructing it. We're going to prove that this little book is basically the skeleton key for some of the toughest questions in the Indian Civil Services exam.
And honestly, even for anyone listening who isn't taking the exam, this is just a fascinating look at how human civilization, organizes itself.
Right.
We're going to look at why we live where we live, how we conquer distance, and how we shrink the world.
Before we jump in, I want to be really clear about our source material. This deep analysis comes directly from the incredible library of the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel. We're diving deep into their curated content today, which does an amazing job of bridging that gap between these school texts and the rigorous demands of the exam. It is a unique resource. And look, producing this kind of detailed breakdown, connecting a single sentence from a 7th grade book to a major government policy framework, that takes a massive amount of time and research.
It really does. So we have a humble request. If you find value in this deep dive, please go over and subscribe to the Simplified UPSC by PPP channel. It really helps the algorithm get this content to the people who need it the most.
Absolutely. And if you're capable, and only if you are, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. That support is what allows the team to keep the lights on and keep bringing this super useful content to you without cutting any corners.
A huge, heartfelt shout out to all the current supporters. You guys are the real MVPs. You're the ones helping create this content.
Also, just some quick housekeeping before we start the heavy lifting. Don't forget to like the video or the audio and share your valuable comments. That engagement really, really helps. And for the students listening,
this part is for you.
Free notes with practice previous year questions, or PYQs as we call them, are available on the public Telegram channel.
But if you want to binge the whole series at once and get the premium notes, we're talking detailed breakdowns, extra PYQs, model mains answers, the works, you can access the private Telegram library. Just DM the team on the public Telegram channel to join. Okay, plug's done. Let's get into the text.
Let's do it.
So the chapter is titled Human Environment. Now, usually when we hear environment, we think of trees or rivers, maybe the ozone layer.
Natural world.
Right. But the text opens with a dialogue between a kid named Ravi and his teacher. It seems simple, but how does the text actually define environment in this context?
The definition is actually quite broad, and that's the point. The text defines environment as the place, people, things, and nature that surround any living organism. It's a combination of natural and human-made phenomena. But here's the critical distinction, the real pivot point for the whole chapter.
Okay.
The text contrasts early humans with modern humans.
Right. It says early humans adapted to the natural environment.
Now, think about what that really means. Really think about it. If it rained, you got wet or you found a cave. If it was cold, you shivered or maybe you found a fur. You were reactive.
You were at the mercy of the elements.
Exactly. Your entire existence was dictated by the whims of nature. You were a passenger on a bus you couldn't steer.
But modern humans, we don't just adapt, do we?
No, not at all. We modify the environment for our needs. We don't just find a cave. We blast a tunnel through a mountain to make a highway. We don't just pick wild berries. We clear 1,000 acres of forest to grow genetically modified wheat.
That's a huge shift.
It's everything. The text explicitly says human beings interact with the environment and modify it according to their need. This shift, this move from adaptation to modification, is the root of all settlement geography. It is the moment we stopped being passengers and decided to try and drive the bus.
And that drive to modify leads us directly to the concept of settlement. The text traces this timeline really quickly, but it's so profound. We went from being tree dwellers and cave dwellers to agriculture. And the moment we started planting crops, the rules of the game changed completely.
It's the agricultural revolution. You can't be a nomad if you have to wait 6 months for wheat to grow. It's just not possible. You need to water it, you need to protect it from animals, you have to harvest it. So a permanent home became a necessity, not a luxury.
And the text points out that these early permanent settlements always grew near river valleys.
Which seems obvious, right? You need water.
Of course.
But it's more than that. The text asks the reader to recall the specific civilizations. Indus, Tigris, Nile, and Huanghe. Why recall them? Why those four? Because it reinforces that settlement isn't just about building a house, it's about resource management.
Okay, so it's a strategic choice.
It's a formula. Water plus fertile land from the river's silt deposits equals a surplus of food. And surplus food equals civilization. It means some people can stop farming and become artisans, priests, soldiers. It's the start of everything.
It's amazing that even in a 7th grade book, they're grounding you in that deep civilizational history. It's not just a fact, it's a foundational principle.
Exactly.
Now, the text breaks settlements down into two main types, temporary and permanent. I feel like in the modern world, we just assume everything is permanent. Who even lives in a temporary settlement anymore?
You'd be surprised. It's more common than you think. The text specifically mentions deep forests, hot and cold deserts, and high mountains. The people there practice hunting, gathering, shifting, cultivation, activities that require movement.
So they're following the resources.
Precisely. And there's a specific term introduced here that is, it's absolute gold for UPSC aspirants. The term is transhumance.
Transhumance. I love that word. It sounds so technical.
It sounds fancy, but it's actually a very grounded and logical economic strategy. It refers to the seasonal movement of people. Specifically, people who rear animals move in search of new pastures according to the changes in seasons.
So, like the Gujars and Bakarwals in India, that's a perfect example, isn't it?
It's the textbook example. Think about the logic of it. In the summer, the snow melts in the high Himalayas, and this lush, nutritious grass grows at 3,000 meters. So the herders move their flocks up.
And in the winter?
In the winter, that entire area is buried in snow, so they move down to the foothills where it's warmer, and they're still grazing land. They aren't wandering aimlessly. They are following the energy source. They are still practicing that adaptation to the environment we talked about.
Ah, so that's the link.
That's the link. Whereas people in permanent settlements are all about modification, transhumance is a living remnant of the older adaptation phase of human existence.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. But, as you say, most of us today are in permanent settlements. Within that category, we have the Great Divide, rural versus urban.
And this is where we get into the meat of the chapter and, frankly, the meat of the syllabus for any civil service exam.
So how does the book define them?
It's a pretty straightforward functional definition. Rural is defined as villages where people are engaged in primary activities. So agriculture, fishing, forestry, crafts, things that extract directly from nature.
And urban?
Urban is defined as towns, which are small, and cities, which are larger. The key is that urban activities are secondary and tertiary manufacturing, trading, and services. You're processing things or providing services, not extracting raw materials.
It seems like a clean split. Village equals farm, city equals factory or office. But let's see how this plays out in the real world, specifically in the UPSC Mains. We have a question from 2013 General Studies Paper 2, question 14.
Right, I have it here. The question was, the basis of providing urban amenities in rural areas, PURA, is rooted in establishing connectivity. Comment.
PRA, providing urban amenities in rural areas. This was Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam's big vision, wasn't it?
It was. And look at how perfectly it connects to the NCERT. The NCERT describes rural life as having open spaces, but it implies a lack of facilities compared to the city. It describes urban life as congested, but service-rich.
So there's a trade-off.
Exactly. The PRA concept is basically asking, why does there have to be a trade-off? Why do we have to choose?
Why does a talented person from a village have to migrate to a slum in a major city just to get a good education or access to quality health care?
Precisely. So PRA argues that if you establish connectivity, you can bring the urban amenities to the rural setting. But, and this is the key for writing a good answer, connectivity doesn't just mean building a road.
The NCERT talks a lot about transport, but PRA goes further than that.
Much further. PURA, in its original conception, relies on 4 types of connectivity. There's physical connectivity, that's the roads, the railways, which the NCERT covers well.
Yeah, that's the obvious one.
Then there's electronic connectivity, so telecom, reliable internet, fiber optics.
Knowledge connectivity, which
That means a network of good schools, colleges, vocational training centers. It's about ensuring the quality of human capital isn't dependent on your postal code. And finally, and maybe most importantly, economic connectivity.
markets.
Good markets, reliable supply chains, access to finance, things that allow rural enterprises to thrive.
So when you're writing that Mains answer, you're essentially starting with the NCERT simple definition. You're saying, look, this is the classic divide between rural and urban.
Yes, you use the 7th grade definition to identify the problem, the gap between rural and urban, and then you use the policy framework, PURA, to propose the solution. That is the linkage. You aren't just memorizing facts, you're diagnosing a societal structure and prescribing a remedy.
That's a high-level skill built from a simple foundation. Okay, let's move on to the physical structure of these settlements. The text has this great section on how houses are built to suit the climate. It suggests that architecture isn't just about style, it's about survival.
It is pure logic applied to geography. It's problem solving. The text gives a few examples that are visually very strong and easy to remember. In heavy rainfall regions, why do you have slanting roofs?
So the water runs off and doesn't collect and collapse the roof. Simple as that.
Simple physics. But then it gets more interesting. It mentions flood-prone regions. There's that classic visual in the text of the houses on stilts.
Right, raised up on these platforms.
Now, think about this not as a geography fact, but in the context of disaster management, which is a huge part of the syllabus. If you're an administrator posted in Assam or Kerala, regions that are prone to flooding,
Okay.
looking at this traditional architecture, the stilt houses, isn't just a history lesson. It's a proven mitigation strategy. The text is showing you that local populations have already engineered a sustainable, low-cost solution to the environmental threat of flooding.
That is a great point. We often try to bring in these, heavy, modern concrete solutions when the traditional stilt method was actually more adaptive and probably more sustainable.
Exactly. Then you have hot climates. The text mentions thick, mud-walled houses with thatched roofs.
Why mud walls? I always assumed it's just because mud is cheap and available.
That's part of it, the local material aspect, but it's primarily about thermal dynamics. Mud is a bad conductor of heat. It has high thermal mass. It means it takes a long time for the sun's heat to penetrate the wall. It keeps the inside cool when the outside is scorching. It acts as a natural insulator.
So it's basically natural air conditioning.
In a way, yes. The text mentions using local materials like stone, mud, clay, straw. This is sustainable housing long before sustainability became a global buzzword.
And then, for the extreme cold, the text brings up the igloo dwellings made of ice, which always just blows my mind. You're using cold, frozen ice to stay warm.
It's all about insulation. The compressed snow traps air pockets, and it's a fantastic insulator. It traps your body heat inside. It's an incredible example of human ingenuity. But the text also talks about the layout of these settlements, not just the houses. It discusses compact versus scattered.
Yes. A compact settlement is where dwellings are built very close together, usually on flat land.
Think of a dense village in the northern plains of India, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar. You have flat land, fertile soil, so it can support a high population density. Houses are often wall-to-wall.
Versus a scattered settlement.
Right. That's where dwellings are spaced out over an extensive area. You find these in hilly tracts, thick forests, or regions of extreme climate. Think of the Northeast, or parts of Himachal or Uttarakhand. The terrain itself prevents people from clustering too closely.
Okay, so we have this picture of rural life deeply connected to its environment, but the text creates a really sharp contrast with the urban environment. There's a dialogue in the book between characters named Mary and Prasad. Prasad visits the city and talks about the fresh air of his village, but Mary's father complains about the pollution and traffic in the city.
And that little line about pollution and traffic isn't just some throwaway dialogue, it's the hook. It mirrors the grim reality of Indian urbanization. And this connects directly to a Mains 2015 question.
Which one was that?
Question 15. Mumbai, Delhi, and Kolkata are the 3 megacities of the country. But the air pollution is a much more serious problem in Delhi as compared to the other 2. Why is this so?
Oh, that is a classic question.
Ah.
Every single winter, This becomes the national headline. So how does the NCERT, this 7th grade book, help us answer that?
The NCERT establishes the baseline principle. Cities generally have pollution due to congestion and fumes. Mary's father complains about the smoke, that's step one. But the why Delhi specifically part requires us to use another core concept from the text, the location of the settlement.
Location.
Yeah, exactly. Mumbai and Kolkata are coastal cities. They have what's called a maritime influence. What does the sea do? It provides a sea breeze. It ensures constant air circulation. It disperses the pollutants out over the ocean.
But Delhi?
Delhi is landlocked. It has a continental climate, and geographically, it's in a sort of bowl. The text talks about settlements adapting to their environment. Well, Delhi's environment is a trap. In winter, the air gets cold and heavy. A phenomenon called temperature inversion happens, and it traps the pollutants near the ground. There is no sea breeze to blow it all away.
So it just stagnates.
It stagnates and suffocates the city. So, you see, the NCERT gives you the general principle, cities pollute. But you have to apply the geographical context of site and location to answer that very specific high-level mains question.
That makes so much sense. And speaking of urban challenges, the text also mentions slums and squatter settlements, where people are forced to stay in congested, unhygienic conditions because they've migrated for jobs.
Which brings us to a very recent question. Mains 2025, question 8. How does Smart City in India address the issues of urban poverty and distributive justice?
Wow, straight from the headlines into the exam hall.
And the connection is crystal clear. The NCERT identifies the root problem. Rural to urban migration leads to the formation of slums because our cities just can't cope. The infrastructure collapses under the sheer weight of the incoming population.
And the Smart City mission is supposed to be the fix.
It's the modern, technology-driven answer to that very problem. It's about using technology and better urban planning to retroactively fix the congestion, the lack of sanitation, the poor living conditions that are described so simply in this 7th grade text.
It's all connected. The problem is right there in the textbook. The proposed solution is in the government policy and the exam paper.
Precisely. And if you don't understand the root cause described in the chapter, the push and pull factors of migration, the lack of rural amenities, you can't effectively critique the smart city solution in your answer.
Okay, let's shift gears, moving to section 3, transport. The text calls them the lifelines of civilization, which is a pretty grand title.
But it's true, isn't it? Transport is the means by which people and goods move. Without it, every settlement is an isolated island. The chapter traces the evolution quickly. Walking, then using animals, then the revolutionary invention of the wheel, then the steam engine, and finally modern transport.
It's interesting that it explicitly lists animals that are still used today. It says donkeys, mules, bullocks, camels in India.
Which we see all the time, especially in rural areas.
But it also mentions llamas in the Andes and yaks in Tibet.
I always love that they include the llamas, but it's a great point. It shows that even in our high-tech world, geography still dictates the mode of transport. You can't run a semi-truck up a steep, narrow Andean trail easily. A llama is simply better suited.
It's a case of appropriate technology for the specific terrain.
Exactly. The environment still has the final say in many places.
The text classifies transport into 4 major modes. Let's start with roadways.
Roadways are classified into metalled, which means pucca or paved roads, and unmetalled, which are kucha or dirt roads. The key advantage of roads, according to the text, is their reach, their last-mile connectivity.
They can go where other modes can't.
Right. They can penetrate terrains that are impossible for railways or waterways, high mountains, deep forests, deserts.
And the text gives a prime example. The Manali-Leh Highway.
Yes, one of the highest roadways in the world. Think about the engineering feat there. It's a perfect example of humans modifying the environment, conquering the abiotic or non-living environment. We essentially built a road across the roof of the world where nature said, no, this is a frozen desert.
And then for cities, the text mentions subways and flyovers.
Again, modifying the environment to solve a problem. The problem is congestion. We ran out of space on the ground, so we went underground with subways or overhead with flyovers. It's all about overcoming the friction of distance and space.
Then we have railways. The text says they're great for carrying heavy goods and large numbers of people over long distances, and they do it quickly and cheaply.
The technological shift is also noted, how steam engines were replaced by more efficient diesel and electric engines. But there's a massive global highlight here, the Trans-Siberian Railway.
The longest railway system in the world.
It connects St. Petersburg in western Russia all the way to Vladivostok on the Pacific coast. It is, without exaggeration, the lifeline of Russia. Imagine trying to govern a country that spans 11 time zones without it. The East and West would effectively be different countries.
But let's bring this back to India and the UPSC Mains. The NCERT paints a very positive functional picture of railways, fast, cheap, efficient.
It does. It describes their utility. But as an aspirant, you have to put on your historian hat. You have to look at the colonial angle.
And there's a PYQ for that.
Of course there is. UPSC Mains 2014, question 6, asked examinees to discuss the economic policies of the British in India. You simply cannot discuss British economic policy without discussing the railways.
It's central to the whole story.
Absolutely. The text mentions the Industrial Revolution and the steam engine. Well, in the Indian context, the British didn't build railways just so people could visit their grandparents. That was a side effect. They built them to extract resources.
To get the raw materials out of the hinterland and to the ports.
Exactly. They designed the network in what's called a dendritic pattern, like the roots of a tree, with all the branches feeding into the main trunk.
And the trunk was always a port city.
Always. Bombay, Calcutta, Madras. The railways were giant suction tubes. You take raw cotton from the Deccan hinterland, rush it by train to Bombay, ship it to the textile mills in Manchester, then you take the finished cloth from Manchester, ship it back to Bombay, and use the same railway to flood the Indian market, destroying the local weavers in the process.
So when the insert says railways carry heavy goods, in the 1850s, those heavy goods were India's raw wealth leaving the country.
Precisely. The cheap and quick transport that the text mentions actually accelerated the deindustrialization of India. It made it far too easy for the British to dump their finished goods and undermine local economies.
That adds a whole new layer of darkness to that simple sentence in the textbook.
It does. But here's the dialectic, the twist in the story that you need for a nuanced answer. While the British intended for the railways to be a tool of extraction,
It had an unintended consequence?
a massive one, the railway inadvertently did something else. It brought people from different regions together for the first time. It allowed a lawyer like Mahatma Gandhi to travel from one end of the country to the other and see its unity in diversity. It unintentionally created the physical platform for the rise of Indian nationalism.
Wow. That is the nuance.
Yeah.
So you quote the insert on the utility of railways, the speed, the volume, but then you analyze the intent and the impact through the critical lens of history.
Exactly. History and geography are always inseparable.
Let's move to mode 3, waterways. The text says this is the cheapest mode for heavy and bulky goods over long distances.
And it divides them into two types. Inland waterways, so navigable rivers and lakes, and sea routes. For inland, it lists the Ganga-Brahmaputra system in India, the Great Lakes in North America, and the River Nile in Africa.
And for sea routes, it lists some major ports: Singapore, Mumbai, New York, Rotterdam. But let's stick with the inland waterways for a moment. The insert paints this picture of huge potential. The Ganga-Brahmaputra system is massive. It implies we should be using it like a water highway.
But here comes the contradiction, and this is where the PYQ comes in. UPSC Mains 2015, question 16. It said something like, India is well endowed with fresh water resources. Critically examine why it still suffers from water scarcity. And a key part of that discussion often involves navigation.
Right. Why do we struggle so much with inland navigation if we have these gigantic rivers? The text says they are navigable.
This is a perfect example of the insert giving you the potential, but the exam asking about the reality. The reality is our rivers suffer from heavy silting, which makes the riverbeds shallow.
So boats get stuck.
They get stuck. The reality is also seasonal flow in the monsoon. The rivers can be dangerously swollen, and in the dry season, the water level can be too low for large vessels.
And there's a lack of infrastructure, I imagine. Terminals, dredging.
A huge lack of infrastructure. So the text gives you the what, we have these rivers. The exam asks, so what? And why not? Why aren't we using them effectively, like the Rhine in Germany or the Danube across Europe? Why is almost everything in India still sent by expensive polluting trucks?
That's a fantastic critical analysis. And finally, the fourth mode, airways.
Developed in the early 20th century, the text gets the pros and cons right. It's the fastest, but also the most expensive, mainly due to high fuel costs. And it's vulnerable to bad weather fog, and storms can shut down an airport completely.
But the text makes a critical point about its unique utility.
It does. It says it's the only mode of transport that can reach the most remote and inaccessible areas.
And it specifically highlights its role in disaster management. rescuing people, distributing food, water, and medicine during calamities. There's even a picture of the text of a helicopter doing exactly that.
And that links directly to General Studies Paper 3, Disaster Management.
100%.
Yeah.
When you're writing an answer about flood relief in Uttarakhand or earthquake response in Nepal, what's the first thing you mention? The role of aerial support. Helicopters from the Air Force. That image in the Class 7 textbook is the visual representation of a rapid response mechanism. It's wild. Every single picture in this book is a potential exam point.
That's how you have to read it. You don't just look at the helicopter and say, oh, cool chopper. You have to see it and think, that is the primary logistical tool for immediate disaster relief when surface transport links are compromised or destroyed.
Okay, let's move to the final section of the chapter, communication. The text defines it as the process of conveying messages to others.
And the evolution here is just breathtakingly rapid. The book traces it from pigeons and drumbeats to the postal system, then the telephone, then mass media, and now, of course, the internet.
The text defines mass media as newspapers, radio, and television because they can communicate with a very large number of people at once. But then it talks about the satellite revolution.
And this is key. We often think of satellites just for GPS on our phones or maybe for TV channels, but the text explicitly lists their other applications. And it's a surprisingly heavy list for a 7th grader.
What does it list?
It lists oil exploration, forest surveys, monitoring underground water levels, locating mineral wealth, weather forecasting, and disaster warning.
Wow. So that list alone covers energy security, environmental protection, resource management, and disaster mitigation.
Exactly. Satellites are the eyes of the modern state. When you study remote sensing in GIS in the science and tech portion of GS3, you are basically just writing a long essay expanding on this single paragraph. How do we know where groundwater is depleting? Satellites. How do we track a cyclone as it approaches the coast of Odisha? Satellites.
And then we finally enter the internet age. The text talks about the creation of a global society and this new level of interconnectivity.
And we have a PYQ linkage here regarding technology and society. 2 linkages, actually. First, Prelims 2019, question 91, which asked about the differences between augmented reality, AR, and virtual reality, VR.
Okay, how does that connect to a chapter on basic communication like post offices and TV?
Because the NCERT traces the evolution of communication from drumbeats to the internet, AR and VR are simply the next step in that same timeline. The text talks about conveying messages. VR goes beyond conveying a message. It tries to convey an experience. It fundamentally alters how we perceive our environment.
So just like the steam engine was a quantum leap for transport, VR is a quantum leap for communication.
You could argue that. And the second linkage is from Mains 2016, question 17, regarding the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and its role in globalization.
How does that connect?
The NCERT says communication and transport have shrunk the world into a global society. That shrinking of time and distance is the very engine of globalization. It is what enables the complex international trade that the WTO regulates.
I see. You cannot have a global supply chain, a phone designed in California with parts from Korea and Taiwan, assembled in China, if you don't have the communication and transport networks described in this very chapter.
Exactly. You cannot have a Doha round negotiation if you don't have the internet. You cannot ship parts from one continent to another without the sea routes and airways mentioned in Section 4. The entire concept of the global village is built on these underwater fiber optic cables and massive shipping lanes.
So what does this all mean? We've gone through settlements, transport, communication, from the most basic ideas to complex PYQs.
Well, if we try to summarize it, we've basically looked at the story of how humans stopped just adapting to nature and started actively shaping it to meet our needs. We build permanent homes, we pave roads over mountains, we fly over floods, and we send messages through space at the speed of light.
And while this is all from a 7th grade geography book, these are the absolute building blocks for high-level analysis. If you don't understand the fundamental difference between rural and urban settlement patterns, you can't write a coherent answer on the Smart Cities mission.
And if you don't understand why the railways were built in India, you can't understand the foundations of our colonial economy and its post-independence legacy. This isn't just a geography lesson. It's a foundation for urbanization in GS1, infrastructure in GS3, and international trade in GS2.
Here's a thought to leave our listeners with a provocative thought for the future. The NCERT discusses temporary settlements and permanent settlements. But we also talked about climate change. the rising sea levels that were hinted at in that 2025 Mains question about island nations.
Right. The Maldives, Tuvalu, Kiribati.
As sea levels continue to rise, are we going to see a forced return to temporary settlements for coastal populations? Or are we going to see new forms of permanent settlements, maybe, I don't know, floating cities?
That's a fascinating and slightly terrifying question. We might have to move from modifying the land to abandoning the land and actually settling on the water itself. The very definitions of environment and settlement from this chapter might have to be completely rewritten in the next 50 years.
We might become a species of what? Aquatic nomads, using advanced technology to adapt to a hostile environment we created, which brings the whole cycle full circle, right back to adaptation.
Back to square one, but with Wi-Fi.
Something to mull over.
Definitely.
All right, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. I really hope you can see now why we picked this seemingly simple text. It is just dense with insight if you know where to look and how to connect the dots.
It's the basics that build the experts. You really can't write a PhD thesis if you don't know your ABCs. This is the alphabet of human geography.
Before you go, a final reminder. If you found real value in this deep dive, please subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP. It really does support their mission of making this kind of high-quality education accessible to everyone.
And if you can, please consider supporting them on Patreon. It keeps the lights on, the mics recording, and this valuable content coming your way.
And don't forget to join the Telegram channel for the free notes and all those PYQ linkages we discussed today.
And for those who want the full, organized suite of resources, DM on Telegram for the premium library access. The model answers in there are particularly helpful for mains preparation.
Last thing. Don't forget to like and comment. Let us know what stood out to you. Was it the PURA connection? The dark history of the Trans-Siberian Railway?
The concept of transhumance? Let us know in the comments.
Thanks for listening.
I'll see you next time.